If the Great Depression had 7 levels, we are now living in level 3. The media calls it volatility. I call it a reality check, as it seems we are following the 1929 pattern to the T. But let's go back to the start. The financial media called it a healthy correction and promoted buying opportunities at discount prices. The darker truth? It was the point of no return. October 24, 1929. Black Thursday. The market dropped 11% in a single day. Trading volume exploded to 12.9 million shares when normal was 4 million. Then came Black Tuesday, October 29th. Another 12% drop. Volume hit 16.4 million shares. In just days, the Dow lost 25% of its value. Investors who bought stocks on 90% margin got calls they couldn't meet. Fortunes built over years vanished in hours. By mid-November, the Dow had lost almost half its value. But here's what made level 1 so dangerous. Most people thought the worst was over. Newspapers ran headlines about strong fundamentals. The government declared the economy fundamentally sound. Huckle. Investors with cash started buying back in, convinced they were getting stocks at a discount. The media praised their courage. Nobody knew what was coming next. Level 1's legacy wasn't a temporary correction, it was $30 billion in wealth vaporized, margin debt collapsing the system, and the transition from Wall Street's problem to Main Street's nightmare. Our modern version. The S&P 500 dropped 12% from mid-February to April 2025. The exact same percentage as Black Tuesday. On April 3rd, $2 trillion in market value disappeared in a single day. The media ran the same playbook: market correction, healthy pullback, time to buy the dip. The financial media said bank failures were isolated incidents affecting poorly managed institutions. They told people these were exceptions, not the rule. The reality? Over 1,000 banks failed in 1930 alone, and it was just getting started. This is when the crash moved from the stock market to regular people's lives. Banks started closing their doors permanently. There was no FDIC insurance back then. If your bank failed, your life savings were just gone. It started with smaller rural banks and agricultural lenders. The media said those banks were overexposed to farming and made poor lending decisions. The message was clear. Your bank is fine, those banks were reckless. People believed it until their bank was next. By 1931, credit froze completely. People who had money couldn't access it. Businesses that were profitable couldn't get loans to make payroll. The entire financial system was seizing up, bank by bank, town by town. The panic fed on itself. When people heard their neighbor's bank failed, they ran to their own bank to pull out cash. Those bank runs forced even healthy banks to close because they didn't keep enough cash on hand to pay every depositor at once. This wasn't isolated incidents. By 1933, it was 9,000 bank failures, billions in life savings vaporized, credit markets frozen solid. And the moment Americans realized their money wasn't safe anywhere, billions in savings, gone. Our modern version. March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed with $209 billion in assets, the second largest bank failure since the FDIC started keeping records in 1934. Then Signature Bank with $110.4 billion. Then First Republic. The media called them unique situations with specific risk profiles. Tech bank, crypto bank, regional bank. Nothing systemic, they said. But 2025 has already seen 2 more failures. Pulaski Savings Bank in January, Santa Ana National Bank in June, both flagged by the FDIC for suspected fraud. The financial media stopped sugarcoating it. They started calling it depression, but insisted recovery was just around the corner. The numbers told a different story. This was economic freefall with no bottom in sight. Unemployment hit 15.9% in 1931. 1 in 6 Americans who wanted to work couldn't find a job. The stock market kept falling. Breadlines formed in every major city. Families that had been middle class a few years earlier were standing in line for free soup. Children went hungry. Shantytowns called Hoovervilles started appearing in parks and empty lots as people lost their homes. Cardboard, scrap metal, tar paper. These weren't homeless encampments. These were former accountants, teachers, salesmen living in shacks. Banks were still failing. Another wave of closures accelerated through 1931. The American dream became a cruel joke. Level three's legacy wasn't recovery just around the corner. It was 15.9% unemployment, breadlines stretching for blocks, Hoovervilles spreading across America, and the middle class being destroyed in real time. We are entering this now. Unemployment ticked up to 4.3% in August 2025, highest since October 2021. The broader U6 rate hit 8.1%. Job growth stalled to just 22,000 in August. October 2025. The U.S. government faces shutdown. Consumer confidence is cracking. Credit is tightening. Layoffs are accelerating in tech, finance, and retail. We haven't hit 1931's 15.9% yet, but the conditions are being set right now. The soft landing narrative is the 2025 version of prosperity is just around the corner. We just crossed over into level 3. The media called the Dust Bowl a temporary drought and regional agricultural issue. It was an environmental disaster that accelerated economic collapse and destroyed an entire region. Starting in 1931, severe drought combined with decades of poor farming practices turned the Great Plains into a desert. Massive dust storms, black blizzards, swept across Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and Colorado. The sky turned black at noon. Dust piled 6 feet high against houses. Farmers had already been drowning in debt since the 1920s. Agricultural prices collapsed after World War I ended. Then the banks failed in level 2, cutting off credit. Now their land was literally blowing away. Between 1930 and 1935, over 500,000 Americans were forced off their farms. Foreclosures hit record levels. Families loaded everything they owned into trucks and headed west, hoping to find work in California. Most didn't. Food production plummeted even as people were starving in cities. Wheat production dropped 71% in affected areas. The breadbasket of America had turned to dust. Crime started rising. Desperate people, no options. Robbery, burglary, theft. Small towns that had never locked their doors now lived in fear. Level 4's legacy wasn't a temporary regional drought. It was 500,000 Americans displaced, 75% of topsoil blown away across 100 million acres. Agricultural production collapsed. What's coming if we hit our level 4? Climate instability is accelerating. Droughts in the Southwest. Floods in the Midwest. Supply chain fragility exposed by every weather event. Farmers are carrying record debt of $520 billion as of 2024. The verdict, unfortunately, is an environmental shock combined with economic instability, creating amplification neither system can handle. The financial media that still existed barely covered the social collapse. When they did, they blamed criminals and troublemakers rather than acknowledging systemic failure. Society itself started coming apart. Unemployment climbed to 23.6% by 1932. 1 in 4 Americans who wanted to work couldn't find a job. The stock market kept falling. By summer 1932, the Dow closed at 41.22, down 89% from its 1929 peak. 89%. Nearly a decade of gains wiped out. Crime surged across every category. Suicide rates increased by over 30%. In some cities, they nearly doubled. People jumped from buildings, hung themselves in garages. The shame of losing everything was unbearable. Banks were still failing. Another 2,000 plus would close between 1931 and 1932. Deflation set in as the money supply contracted by 31%. Prices fell, which sounds good until you realize it meant businesses couldn't sell products, couldn't pay workers, couldn't stay open. The downward spiral fed on itself. Hoovervilles expanded to every major city. In New York Central Park, on the Seattle waterfront, outside Chicago, thousands living in structures that barely qualified as shelter. This is when the psychological damage set in. People who lived through level 5 never trusted the stock market again, never trusted banks again, saved every penny for the rest of their lives. The trauma lasted generations. And all this was not temporary hardship. It was 23.6% unemployment, the Dow down 89%, suicide rates up 30%, crime surging, 2,000 more bank failures, and the death of trust in the entire financial system. If we would ever hit level 5, all this could repeat in the span of 18 months, just like it did between 1929 and 1932. The media barely existed at this point. Newspapers were closing. People couldn't afford anything. The narrative had collapsed along with everything else. Complete social breakdown. The people still employed were working reduced hours for reduced pay. Families were sleeping in cars, under bridges, in shanties made of cardboard and scrap metal. Birth rates plummeted because people couldn't afford to have children. The future looked too bleak to bring new life into it. Families fell apart. Fathers abandoned homes because they couldn't handle the shame. Children were sent to relatives or orphanages. Mass migration accelerated. Dust Bowl refugees flooded California, hoping for work. They found overcrowded camps, starvation wages, and hostility. They weren't welcomed. They were treated like invaders. In the summer of 1932, thousands of World War I veterans marched on Washington, demanding early payment of bonuses they'd been promised. These were men who'd fought for their country. They set up camps in the Capitol. Peaceful protest. The government's response: President Hoover ordered the army to clear them out. General Douglas MacArthur led troops with tanks and tear gas against American veterans. The camps burned. People died. The images shocked the nation. The government was using violence against its own citizens, veterans who had served, because they dared to ask for help. Protests and riots broke out in cities across the country. People started questioning whether democracy could survive this. 3 years of being told prosperity is just around the corner while watching conditions get worse had destroyed any remaining trust in leadership. It wasn't about the poverty and unemployment. It was the government turning tanks on veterans, mass migration creating refugee crises, birth rates collapsing, families disintegrating, and the moment Americans stopped believing their government could or would help them. Democracy's legitimacy was in question. What's coming if we hit our level 6? Government legitimacy in crisis. Social disorder escalating to violence. The path to level 6 is much shorter than most people think. There was no media narrative left to sell. The system had hit absolute bottom. Unemployment peaked at 24.9% in 1933. Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in March 1933 and immediately declared a bank holiday. Every single bank in America closed for 4 days so the government could figure out which ones were still solvent. The entire banking system shut down. Nobody could access money. Nobody could make transactions. The financial system had completely seized. When banks reopened, only the stable ones got to stay open. Thousands more closed permanently. This was the absolute bottom, the point where the system had to be fundamentally restructured or it would collapse entirely. The stock market had fallen 89% from peak. 9,000 banks had failed. A quarter of the country was unemployed. Hoovervilles were in every city. The Dust Bowl had displaced 500,000 people. Crime was rampant. Trust was gone. The New Deal launched massive government programs. The FDIC to insure deposits. Glass-Steagall to separate banking. Social Security, government jobs programs. Unemployment dropped from 25% to around 14% by 1937, then spiked back up. The stock market didn't reach 1929 levels again until 1954, 25 years later. What actually ended the Great Depression? World War II. Massive government spending. Fact orders running 24/7. Millions drafted. By 1941, unemployment finally dropped below 10%. Level 7's legacy wasn't recovery through smart policy. It was complete shutdown of America's banking system, emergency government intervention to prevent total collapse, and a decade of partial recovery that only truly ended when the largest war in human history forced massive spending. The system broke so badly it took a world war to fix it. We're not at level 7. Not yet. But you need to understand what it looks like, because the path from level 3 to level 7, where we are now, to complete systemic collapse, can happen faster than anyone expects. The Great Depression had 7 levels from crash to total collapse, and we're sitting in level 3 right now, with level 4's warning signs already showing up. The media is running the exact playbook from 1929. Market correction, healthy pullback, soft landing ahead. They said the same things right up until 9,000 banks failed and a quarter of the country couldn't find work. The difference? Back then, they were flying blind, you're not. Subscribe to stick to the facts and stay away from the traps nobody teaches you about.